What Japan now sells to foreign militaries after 70 years of pacifism will change how you see the country. Japan just signed a $6.5 billion defense deal with Australia, the largest military export agreement in its history. For a country that spent 7 decades bound by a pacifist constitution, this is not just a sale. It is a strategic earthquake. 11 advanced warships will be built for the Australian Navy, each carrying 128 missile cells, quadruple the firepower of Australia's current frigates. And it signals that the Indo-Pacific is entering a new arms race where old alliances are dead and new partnerships will determine who controls the region. Here is what is really happening. Since 1947, Japan's constitution has contained Article 9, a clause that renounces war and prohibits maintaining offensive military forces. For 70 years, this meant Japan could not export weapons at all. While countries like South Korea, Israel, and Sweden built billion-dollar defense industries selling fighter jets and missile systems worldwide, Japan's advanced military technology stayed locked inside its borders. The Japan Self-Defense Forces developed some of the world's most sophisticated radar systems, naval platforms, and electronic warfare capabilities. None of it could be exported. That created a strategic problem. Japan's defense industry remained small, inefficient, and expensive. Without export markets, production runs stayed limited. Without competition abroad, innovation lagged. Meanwhile, China was building the world's largest navy, expected to reach 400 warships by 2025, up from 340 just 3 years earlier. North Korea was testing ballistic missiles monthly, and the United States, Japan's primary security guarantor since World War II, was stretched thin across the globe. Can Japan transform from a pacifist nation into a major defense exporter without triggering a regional backlash? And will its partnership with Australia create a new military bloc capable of countering China's dominance in the Indo-Pacific? This is not just about Japan and Australia. It is about a fundamental restructuring of regional power. China now operates the largest navy on Earth, with over 400 vessels, including modern guided missile destroyers and cruisers equipped with advanced anti-air and anti-ship systems. The United States had military commitments in Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific simultaneously. Australia, geographically isolated and resource-rich, needs advanced defensive systems it cannot build alone. And Japan, technologically advanced but constitutionally restricted, needs partners who can absorb its military exports and integrate them into a coordinated defense strategy. But here is where it gets interesting. This deal is not just about selling equipment, it is about Japan rewriting the rules of its post-war identity. In 2014, Japan did something unprecedented. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe reinterpreted Article 9 to allow collective self-defense, meaning Japan could defend allies under attack, even if Japan itself was not directly threatened. Then in 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Japan announced it would double defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027, putting it among the world's top 5 military budgets at over $70 billion annually. But spending money was not enough. Japan needed a way to make its defense industry sustainable. That required exports. In 2014, Japan lifted its blanket ban on weapons exports, replacing it with the 3 principles on transfer of defense equipment and technology. The new rules allowed sales to countries that shared Japan's security interests if the equipment contributed to international peace and Japan's security. For 8 years, progress was slow. Japan sold surveillance radar to the Philippines. It explored joint fighter jet development with the UK and Italy, but no major deals materialized. Japanese manufacturers were inexperienced in international defense sales. They could not compete on price with South Korea or Turkey, and politically, selling weapons remained controversial at home. The Ukraine war changed everything. Russia's invasion in February 2022 shattered assumptions about regional stability. If Russia could invade a neighbor, despite international condemnation, what would stop China from doing the same in Asia? NATO countries immediately pledged to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP. Japan followed suit. Suddenly, pacifism was not just outdated, it was dangerous. Japan's defense transformation accelerated. Tokyo approved purchasing 400 American Tomahawk cruise missiles, precision strike weapons with a range exceeding 1,000 miles, for approximately $2.35 billion between 2025 and 2027. These were not defensive weapons. They were offensive systems capable of striking deep into enemy territory. Japan also began developing extended-range versions of its Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, pushing its range beyond 620 miles and transforming it into a land attack weapon. What they did next shocked even close observers. Australia had a problem. Its northern approaches, the sea and air routes separating it from Southeast Asia and China, were increasingly vulnerable. Chinese naval activity in the South China Sea had expanded dramatically. China's Belt and Road Initiative was bringing infrastructure projects and political influence to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, Australia's immediate neighbors. And Australia's military, while highly capable, was small. Just 60,000 active personnel covering a continent the size of the continental United States. Australia needed force multipliers, technology that would let a small military punch above its weight. That meant advanced missiles, electronic warfare systems, and networked sensors that could detect threats hundreds of miles away and coordinate responses automatically. It also meant expanding Australia's major surface combatant fleet from 11 ships to 26 over the next decade. Japan had exactly what Australia needed. In August 2025, Australia announced it would acquire 11 Mogami-class frigates, built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, for approximately $6.5 billion. These are not ordinary frigates. Each upgraded Mogami carries 128 vertical launch cells, 4 times the 32-cell capacity of Australia's current general-purpose frigate. That means each ship can carry a combination of anti-air, anti-ship, and anti-submarine missiles in quantities that rival much larger destroyers. The Mogami class represents a new approach to naval warfare. At roughly 5,500 tons, they are smaller and cheaper than traditional destroyers, but they pack comparable firepower through modularity and automation. A Mogami operates with a crew of just 90 sailors compared to 180 to 200 for conventional frigates, using automation and artificial intelligence to handle damage control, combat systems, and engineering. That matters enormously for Australia, which struggles to recruit and retain enough sailors to crew its existing fleet. But here is the kicker. This was not just a one-way sale. The deal requires substantial technology transfer and co-production in Australia, meaning Australian shipyards will gain expertise in building advanced warships while creating thousands of domestic jobs. Japan is sharing its most sensitive naval technology with a foreign partner, something it has never done before. What makes this deal revolutionary is not the hardware, it is the integration. Japan and Australia are building interoperable systems, meaning their militaries can share targeting data in real time, coordinate missile strikes across hundreds of miles, and operate as a unified force even though they are separate nations. Consider how this works in practice. The Mogami frigates Australia is acquiring will operate alongside Japanese self-defense force vessels using compatible data links, communications systems, and tactical protocols. When combined with the Reciprocal Access Agreement signed in 2024, which allows Japanese and Australian forces to train and operate on each other's territory, this creates a de facto integrated naval force across the Indo-Pacific. The operational implications are staggering. In July 2025, Japan demonstrated this capability by conducting live-fire tests of its Type 12 surface-to-ship missile at Australia's Beecroft Weapons Range in New South Wales for the second consecutive year. Japanese ground self-defense force units fired 3 missiles from truck-mounted launchers at targets off the Australian coast during Exercise Talisman Sabre, proving they could deploy and operate offensive systems from Australian territory. This is the same concept that makes NATO formidable: shared sensors, shared shooters, interoperable systems. But it has never existed in the Indo-Pacific at this scale. Japan and the United States have practiced it for decades. Australia and the United States are close partners, but direct Japan-Australia military integration is new, and it creates a strategic triangle with the United States at the center that China cannot ignore. Here is the part that kept Chinese planners up at night. This is not static defense. Australia is simultaneously acquiring long-range strike capabilities, including Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States, with ranges exceeding 1,000 miles. Japan is extending its Type 12 missile to over 620 miles. Together, they create overlapping strike zones covering the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and critical sea lanes through Southeast Asia. A hostile fleet operating in contested waters could face coordinated missile strikes from Japanese positions in the Ryukyu Island, Australian positions in the Timor Sea, and American forces operating from Guam, all sharing real-time targeting data. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the deal militarization, disguised as defense cooperation, and warned it would destabilize regional security. But the criticism revealed something more important. Beijing understands that this fundamentally changes the military balance. This deal does not just affect Japan and Australia. It is triggering a cascade of strategic realignments across the Indo-Pacific that will reshape the region for decades. South Korea is watching with deep concern. Like Japan, South Korea has a sophisticated defense industry. Unlike Japan, it has been aggressively exporting weapons for years, selling K-9 howitzers to Poland, Fa-50 fighters to Malaysia, submarines to Indonesia, and competing for major contracts worldwide. If Japan's constitutional restrictions continue easing, South Korea faces a formidable new competitor in markets it once dominated. Japan's technology is often superior, its manufacturing quality is legendary, and its diplomatic relationships, particularly with Australia, India, and Southeast Asian nations, give it advantages South Korea cannot match. That competition could drive innovation, better pricing, and more advanced technology, or it could trigger an Asian arms race that spirals into dangerous territory. Already, South Korea is accelerating the development of next-generation destroyers, expanding its submarine fleet, and pursuing naval export contracts with unprecedented aggression. India is recalculating its options. India has long been the dominant military power in South Asia, but it has never fully integrated into Western defense network. It still operates Russian equipment, maintains strategic autonomy, and resists formal alliances. But if Japan, Australia, and the United States are building an interoperable network that excludes India, New Delhi risks strategic isolation. Expect India to pursue deeper defense ties with Japan, potentially including co-production of weapons systems within the next 3 years. Southeast Asian nations are caught in the crossfire. Countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia face pressure from China, but depend on Chinese trade. They cannot openly join an anti-China alliance without economic consequences. But Japanese defense exports offer an alternative, advanced technology from a non-Western power that does not come with the same political baggage as American weapons. Japan is positioning itself as the safe military partner for countries that need to balance China without provoking it. The Philippines has already purchased air defense radars from Japan. Vietnam is exploring the joint development of patrol vessels. Indonesia is discussing technology transfers for submarine systems. Each deal is small by global standards, but collectively, they represent a strategic shift. Southeast Asian nations diversifying away from exclusive dependence on American or Chinese military equipment. But there is one problem nobody is talking about. This strategy only works if Japan can actually deliver. The answer is yes, but only if it solves 3 critical challenges in the next 3 years. First, production capacity. Japan's defense industry is small compared to American, European, or even South Korean competitors. Mitsubishi, heavy industry, the country's largest defense manufacturer, produces fewer systems annually than Lockheed Martin does in a single product line. Scaling up takes time, investment, and workers with specialized skills. If Mitsubishi cannot deliver the Mogami frigates on schedule, countries evaluating Japanese systems will look elsewhere. One failed delivery could destroy Japan's export ambitions before they truly begin. Second, price competitiveness. Japanese weapons are expensive, sometimes double the cost of South Korean equivalents. The Mogami-class frigates are competitive because they are genuinely advanced and come with technology transfers that create local jobs. But Japan's missiles, radar systems, and electronic warfare platforms face brutal price competition from countries that subsidize defense exports as industrial policy. Unless Japan can streamline production, reduce costs, and prove its systems offer superior value, it will capture only niche markets rather than becoming a major exporter. Third, political sustainability. Public opinion in Japan remains divided on military exports. Opposition parties argue it violates the spirit of Article 9, even if it is technically legal under the 2014 three-principle framework. If domestic backlash forces a future government to reverse course or impose new restrictions, countries that invested in Japanese systems will be left with orphan technology and no long-term support. Australia is betting $6.5 billion that Japan's strategic transformation is permanent. If that bet proves wrong, it would shatter trust in Japan as a reliable security partner. Japan has permanently broken its pacifist constraints. The $6.5 billion Mogami-class frigate deal with Australia proves this is not symbolic. It is a strategic transformation that will reshape Indo-Pacific security for decades. Japan is now committed to defense spending, reaching 2% of GDP by 2027, placing it among the world's top 5 military budgets and fundamentally redefining its post-war identity. This creates a new military bloc with unprecedented integration. Japan, Australia, and the United States are building an interoperable defense network that can coordinate strikes, share intelligence, and operate as a unified force across thousands of miles. The Reciprocal Access Agreement allows Japanese forces to operate from Australian territory and vice versa, something unimaginable even 5 years ago. China has no equivalent partnership in the region. The arms race is accelerating faster than most analysts predicted. South Korea will compete harder for export market. India will pursue deeper defense cooperation with Japan to avoid strategic isolation. Southeast Asian nations will upgrade their militaries with Japanese, American, or Chinese systems, triggering spending increases across the region. Military expenditure in Asia is rising faster than in any other region on Earth, and this deal accelerates that trend. So can Japan transform from a pacifist nation into a major defense exporter without triggering regional backlash? And will its partnership with Australia create a new military bloc capable of countering China? The answer is yes, with a critical caveat. This is not a defensive posture anymore. Japan is building offensive strike capabilities, exporting advanced warships to allies, and integrating those systems into a coordinated network that can project power across the Indo-Pacific. China's 400-ship navy remains the largest in the world, but size is not everything. Japan and Australia are building a qualitative advantage: networked systems, interoperable forces, and overlapping strike zones that force China to defend multiple approaches simultaneously. That is the lesson of modern warfare. It is not about matching the enemy ship for ship. It is about creating dilemmas they cannot solve. The question now is not whether Japan will become a military power. It already is one. The question is, what happens when China decides to test this new alliance, and whether the systems Japan is exporting today will be enough to stop what comes next. Because in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the waters between Australia and Southeast Asia, the balance of power is shifting. And the Mogami-class frigates sailing from Japanese shipyards to Australian ports represent something more dangerous than weapons. They represent a commitment that if deterrence fails, Japan will fight not just for its own defense, but for the defense of its partner. That is a promise no Japanese government has made in 70 years, and it changes everything. If you found this breakdown gripping, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps this channel soaring.